A quiet woman with calloused hands and no flight hours stepped onto the polished concrete of Shadowhawk Naval Air Station, where the nation's most elite fighter pilots were forged, until the day Top Gun instructors watched her first landing and realized they had been teaching aviation to the wrong people their entire careers. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the tarmac as Staff Sergeant Maya Chen shouldered her worn canvas bag and walked through the main gates of what pilots called the Forge. Her steps were measured, deliberate, the kind that came from years of military precision, but not the swagger that marked those who owned the sky. The ID scanner beeped twice before accepting her credentials, as if the machine itself questioned whether she belonged here. Behind her, the civilian shuttle that had dropped her off disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving her alone at the threshold of a world that had never seen someone quite like her. Shadowhawk sprawled across the Nevada landscape like a monument to aerial supremacy. Hangar after hangar stretched toward the horizon, each one housing multi-million-dollar killing machines that could break the sound barrier before their pilots finished their morning coffee. The control tower rose like a glass and steel needle, its windows reflecting the endless blue that these men and women claimed as their domain. Everything here spoke of speed, power, and the kind of confidence that came from mastering the impossible. Maya's uniform told a different story. Standard Army fatigues, desert-worn and practical, with patches that spoke of ground deployments rather than aerial victories. No wings adorned her chest, no call sign embroidered on her sleeve. The fabric had seen sandstorms in places whose names were classified, had absorbed the weight of gear that kept soldiers alive in hostile territory. Her boots were scuffed leather, broken in by thousands of miles walked rather than miles flown. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being underestimated, someone who had learned that survival often depended on being overlooked. The intake office sat at the edge of the flight line, a low building that served as the first filter between dreamers and aviators. Inside, the air conditioning hummed against the desert heat, and the walls displayed photographs of legendary pilots whose exploits had become the stuff of military folklore. Behind a metal desk sat a petty officer whose expression shifted from boredom to confusion as Maya approached. "You're here for the transition program?" he asked, consulting his computer screen with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "That's correct," Maya replied, her voice carrying the flat efficiency of someone accustomed to military bureaucracy. The petty officer frowned at his monitor. "Says here you're coming from the 82nd Airborne. Ground support specialist." He looked up at her with the kind of skepticism reserved for obvious mistakes. "This is flight training, fighter aircraft. I'm aware of what this is. Ma'am, with respect, do you have any flight experience, any at all?" Maya's expression didn't change. None. The silence stretched between them like a challenge. The petty officer's fingers tapped against his keyboard, searching for some explanation that would make sense of what he was seeing. Around them, the sounds of the air station filtered through the walls. The distant whine of jet engines, the sharp bark of orders, the metallic clang of maintenance work. These were the sounds of a world in constant motion, where hesitation measured in milliseconds could mean the difference between victory and catastrophe. "This program is for experienced pilots," the petty officer finally said, his tone gentler now, almost apologetic. "Navy, Air Force, Marines. People who've been flying for years. The washout rate is 80% even for them." "I understand the statistics." "Ma'am, I don't think you do. These aren't trainers. These are F/A-18 Super Hornets. They'll pull 9 gigaseconds and hit Mach 2. They're designed to engage enemy aircraft in combat situations that most people can't even imagine. The pilots who fly them have been preparing their entire careers." Maya adjusted the strap of her bag, a gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed, but it carried the weight of someone who had made a decision and would not be moved from it. "Where do I report for orientation?" The petty officer stared at her for a long moment, then shrugged with the resignation of someone who had learned not to question orders that came from above his pay grade. He printed out a form and slid it across the desk. "Hangar 70600 tomorrow. Bring everything on this list." He paused, then added with something that might have been kindness. "Ma'am, if you change your mind, there's no shame in it. This place breaks people who've been flying since they could walk." Maya took the form without looking at it. "Thank you for the information." She left the office and walked onto the flight line proper, where the real business of Shadowhawk revealed itself. F-A-18s sat in neat rows like sleeping predators, their gray paint schemes designed to disappear against cloudy skies or ocean surfaces. Ground crews swarmed around them with the choreographed precision of a ballet, each person knowing exactly where they belonged in the complex dance of keeping war machines ready for battle. Near the largest hangar, a group of pilots in flight suits walked with the easy confidence of people who own their environment. Their conversation carried across the tarmac in fragments, technical jargon mixed with call signs, and the kind of casual references to death-defying maneuvers that marked them as a breed apart. Their flight suits bore patches that told stories of deployments, squadrons, and achievements that most people would never understand. They moved like athletes, like performers, like people who had found their calling in a realm 3 miles above the earth. One of them, a tall man with premature gray at his temples, noticed Maya watching. His gaze took in her uniform, her posture, the obvious fact that she didn't belong. He said something to his companions that Maya couldn't hear, but their laughter carried clearly across the distance. It wasn't cruel, exactly, but it carried the unconscious superiority of people who had never questioned their place at the top of the hierarchy. Maya didn't react to the laughter. She had heard it before, in different contexts, from different people. It was the sound of assumptions being made, of categories being assigned, of someone being filed away as irrelevant. She had learned long ago that the best response to such sounds was silence and patience. People revealed themselves in their assumptions, and she had become an expert at using those revelations to her advantage. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when Maya found her quarters. The bachelor officers' quarters were functional rather than comfortable, designed for people who spent their days in the sky and needed little more than a place to sleep and prepare for the next mission. Her room was small, sterile, and identical to thousands of others on military bases around the world. A single bed, a metal desk, a window that looked out onto the flight line where the day's training was winding down. She unpacked methodically, arranging her few possessions with the same precision she brought to everything else. Her civilian clothes went in one drawer, her uniforms in another. A small collection of books found their way onto the desk, technical manuals on aerodynamics, aircraft systems, and flight dynamics. These were not textbooks assigned by the program. They were volumes she had acquired and studied on her own time, during long deployments when sleep was scarce, and learning was one of the few ways to pass the hours. As darkness settled over the base, Maya sat at the small desk and opened one of the manuals. The pages were worn from repeated reading, margins filled with handwritten notes in her precise script. She read by the light of a single lamp, absorbing information about lift coefficients and thrust vectoring, with the same methodical attention she had once brought to maintaining weapons systems in hostile territory. Outside her window, the flight line had grown quiet. The day's missions were complete, the aircraft secured for the night. Only the soft glow of perimeter lights and the distant hum of the control tower remained. This was the calm before the storm, the quiet moment before she would step into a world that had no place for someone like her. Maya closed the manual and looked out at the dark shapes of the fighters lined up on the tarmac. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of proving that she belonged among them. She knew the odds, understood the expectations, recognized the walls that had been built to keep people like her out. But she also knew something that the others didn't. Something that her silent study and careful observation had taught her over the years. The sky belonged to anyone with the skill and determination to claim it. And Maya Chen had spent her entire military career learning that the most dangerous opponents were often the ones nobody saw coming. She turned off the light and settled in for what might be her last peaceful night at Shadowhawk. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. The alarm buzzed at 0530, but Maya had been awake for 20 minutes, staring at the ceiling and running through mental checklists. The desert air carried a pre-dawn chill that would burn off within hours, replaced by the kind of heat that made the tarmac shimmer like water. She dressed in the flight suit that had been issued to her the previous evening, sage green Nomex that still smelled of the factory, devoid of any patches or markings that would indicate experience or accomplishment. Hangar 7 loomed against the lightening sky, its massive doors already open to reveal the controlled chaos of morning preparation. Inside, a dozen other candidates moved with varying degrees of confidence, some chatting easily while others stood in nervous silence. Maya recognized the types immediately. Navy pilots with carrier experience, Air Force veterans from combat squadrons, Marines who flew close air support missions. Their flight suits told stories through squadron patches, deployment ribbons, and the subtle modifications that marked professional aviators. At the center of the hangar stood three men whose presence commanded immediate attention. Commander Viper Harrison, the program director, carried himself with the casual authority of someone who had logged over 3,000 flight hours in hostile airspace. His weathered face bore the permanent squint lines of a pilot who had spent decades staring into bright skies, searching for threats that appeared as specks on the horizon. Lieutenant Commander Jester Rodriguez wore the slight smile of someone who found humor in situations where others saw only stress. His reputation for unorthodox tactics and creative solutions had made him legendary among younger pilots. Captain Iceman Brennan stood with military precision, his pale blue eyes scanning the assembled candidates with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating potential prey. "Gentlemen and lady," Commander Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, "welcome to the Advanced Fighter Weapons School. For the next 12 weeks, we will attempt to transform you from competent pilots into weapons systems capable of engaging and defeating any aerial threat on the planet." His gaze swept across the assembled candidates, lingering for a moment on Maya before moving on. "This program has a graduation rate of approximately 20%. Of those who do graduate, fewer than half will be selected for operational squadrons flying the missions that matter. The mathematics are simple. Most of you will fail." Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez stepped forward, his hands clasped casually behind his back. "The aircraft you will be flying represents the pinnacle of American military aviation technology. The FA-18 Super Hornet is capable of speeds exceeding Mach 1.8, can pull over 9 gigaseconds in sustained turns, and carries weapon systems that can engage targets beyond visual range. It is also perfectly capable of killing you if you make the slightest error in judgment." Captain Brennan's voice cut through the hangar like a blade. "This program is not about learning to fly. Every person in this hangar should already possess the fundamental skills required to operate high-performance aircraft. This program is about learning to fight, to think tactically while pulling Gs that would render most people unconscious, and to make life-or-death decisions in microseconds while traveling at speeds that compress time into something almost unrecognizable." Maya stood near the back of the group, her posture erect but unremarkable. Around her, the other candidates absorbed the briefing, with the confidence of people who had heard similar speeches before. They nodded at appropriate moments, some taking notes, others simply listening with the relaxed attention of professionals receiving routine information. Their comfort with the environment was obvious in a dozen small ways: the way they stood, how they held their helmets, the casual familiarity with which they regarded the FA-18s visible through the hangar doors. "Your first phase will consist of basic familiarization flights," Commander Harrison continued. "You will learn the specific characteristics of the Super Hornet, its systems, its capabilities, and its limitations. Only after demonstrating complete mastery of the aircraft will you progress to tactical training." A hand shot up from the front of the group. The pilot asking the question wore a flight suit decorated with patches from multiple deployments, his confidence evident in his posture and tone. "Sir, what's the typical timeline for progression to tactical phase?" "That depends entirely on individual performance," Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez replied. "Some candidates have progressed in as little as 3 weeks. Others have spent the entire program attempting to master basic flight characteristics and never advanced beyond familiarization." Captain Brennan's pale eyes found Maya in the crowd. "The aircraft doesn't care about your background, your previous experience, or your personal confidence level. It responds only to competent handling and punishes mistakes with absolute precision. There are no participation trophies in this program, no credit given for effort alone." The briefing continued for another hour, covering safety protocols, training schedules, and the complex evaluation criteria that would determine who advanced and who was eliminated. Maya absorbed every detail, filing away information about emergency procedures, communication protocols, and the subtle hierarchies that governed interaction between instructors and students. She noticed which candidates asked questions that demonstrated deep understanding and which revealed fundamental gaps in knowledge. When the formal briefing concluded, the candidates were divided into smaller groups for individual assessments. Maya found herself assigned to a group of 4, led by Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. The other 3 pilots introduced themselves with easy familiarity. Call signs earned through years of service, stories of deployments to contested airspace, casual references to aircraft they had flown, and missions they had completed. Phoenix Williams had flown F-16s in 3 different combat theaters, his relaxed demeanor masking razor-sharp reflexes and tactical awareness. Shark Thompson carried himself with the controlled aggression of a Marine who had provided close air support to ground units under fire. Zen Nakamura spoke with the quiet precision of a Navy pilot who had executed countless carrier landings in conditions that would terrify most aviators. When the introductions reached Maya, she simply stated her name and previous assignment. The silence that followed was not hostile, but it carried the weight of unasked questions. Her lack of flight experience marked her as fundamentally different from the others, someone whose presence required explanation. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez consulted his tablet, scrolling through what Maya assumed was her service record. His expression revealed nothing, but she noticed the slight pause as he read, the almost imperceptible raising of an eyebrow that suggested surprise or confusion. "Chen, you're coming to us from ground operations," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "That's unusual for this program." "Yes, sir." "Our records show no previous flight training, no civilian pilot certification, no time logged in military aircraft of any kind." "That's correct, sir." Phoenix Williams shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Maya and the instructor. The dynamic in the group had changed, the easy camaraderie replaced by something more complex. Maya could feel their evaluation of her, their attempts to understand how someone with no flight experience had ended up in the most demanding aviation program in the military. "Well," Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez said after a moment, "I suppose we'll find out what you're made of soon enough. The aircraft will provide an honest assessment of your capabilities." He led them toward the flight line, where 4 FA-18s sat in pristine condition. Ground crews moved around the aircraft with practiced efficiency, conducting pre-flight inspections and loading practice ordnance. The morning sun reflected off polished canopies and swept wing surfaces, creating an almost artistic display of military power. "These are your birds for the duration of the program," Rodriguez explained, gesturing toward the fighters. "Each aircraft is maintained to combat-ready standards and equipped with the latest avionics and weapons systems. You will learn every switch, every gauge, every warning light, until operating them becomes as natural as breathing." Shark Thompson ran his hand along the wing of the nearest aircraft, his expression showing the kind of reverence reserved for tools of perfection. "Beautiful machines," he murmured. "I've flown the Legacy Hornet, but the Super Hornet is in a different class entirely." Zen Nakamura nodded in agreement. "The power-to-weight ratio alone changes everything about how you approach tactical situations. More thrust, better avionics, longer range. It's like comparing a sports car to a Formula One racer." Maya listened to their technical discussion, noting their familiarity with aircraft specifications and performance characteristics. Their conversation revealed years of experience with high-performance fighters, an intuitive understanding of how different aircraft behaved in various flight regimes. She absorbed their comments, adding to her growing database of information about the machine she would soon be expected to master. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez pulled out his tablet and began assigning aircraft to pilots. "Phoenix, you've got Hornet 201. Shark, 203 is yours. Zen takes 205. He paused, consulting his notes. "Chen, you're assigned to 207. Maya walked toward her assigned aircraft, aware that the others were watching her with curiosity mixed with skepticism. The F/A-18 Super Hornet was larger than she had expected, its twin engines and swept wings, giving it an aggressive stance even while stationary. Up close, she could see the intricate details that spoke of engineering excellence. The precision fit of panels, the complex array of sensors and antennas, the business-like efficiency of a machine designed for a single purpose. She began her walk-around inspection methodically, checking control surface movement, examining the landing gear, inspecting the engine intakes for foreign object debris. Her movements were careful and thorough, following procedures she had memorized from technical manuals during countless hours of study. She noted the condition of the tires, checked the security of external connections, and verified that safety pins had been removed from all ordnance stations. Phoenix Williams paused in his own inspection to watch her work. "You move like you know what you're looking for," he observed. "I read the technical manual," Maya replied without looking up from her inspection of the nose gear. "Which one?" "There are about 15 different manuals that cover various aspects of the aircraft." Maya straightened, meeting his gaze directly. "All of them." The statement hung in the air between them, carrying implications that none of them were quite ready to process. Phoenix exchanged a glance with Shark, who had stopped his own pre-flight to listen to the conversation. Even Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez looked up from his tablet, his expression showing the first hint of genuine interest. "All of them?" Rodriguez asked. "The flight manual alone is over 800 pages. "I had time to prepare," Maya said simply, returning to her inspection. The morning briefing concluded with the assignment of flight schedules and study materials. Maya found herself scheduled for her first familiarization flight in 3 days, time that would be spent in ground school learning aircraft systems and emergency procedures. As the group dispersed, she noticed the subtle way the others gravitated toward each other, forming the natural bonds that develop between professionals who share common experience and understanding. She walked back toward the academic building alone, her notebook already filled with observations and questions that she would research during her off-duty hours. Behind her, the flight line hummed with activity as the day's training missions began. The sound of jet engines spooling up carried across the desert, a reminder of the world she was attempting to enter and the standards she would be expected to meet. Maya Chen had spent her military career being underestimated, had learned to use that underestimation as an advantage. But here at Shadowhawk, surrounded by the best pilots in the world and facing aircraft that demanded perfection, she wondered if her careful preparation would be enough. The sky, she was learning, kept its own score, and it had no interest in her previous accomplishments or future aspirations. Only performance mattered here. And in 3 days, she would discover whether years of study could substitute for years of experience when the stakes were measured in Gs and milliseconds. The academic building at Shadowhawk possessed the sterile efficiency of a place where theoretical knowledge was hammered into practical understanding through repetition and pressure. Maya arrived 15 minutes early for her first ground school session, finding the classroom empty except for rows of chairs facing a large projection screen. The walls displayed cutaway diagrams of aircraft systems, emergency procedures printed in bold lettering, and photographs of FA-18s in various flight configurations. She chose a seat in the 3rd row, close enough to see details but far enough back to observe the dynamics when the other students arrived. Phoenix Williams entered first, carrying a tablet and a coffee that steamed in the air-conditioned room. He nodded to Maya as he settled into a seat 2 rows ahead, immediately pulling up what appeared to be flight performance charts on his screen. Shark Thompson and Zen Nakamura arrived together, their conversation continuing from the hallway as they found seats near the front. Their easy familiarity with each other had already solidified into the kind of partnership that develops naturally between people who recognize similar competence. The remaining candidates filtered in over the next few minutes, filling the classroom with the subdued energy of professionals preparing for challenging work. Maya noticed the subtle hierarchies already forming groupings based on aircraft experience, service branches, and the indefinable qualities that mark natural leaders. She remained apart from these formations, not by choice, but by circumstance. Her lack of flight experience created a gap that casual conversation couldn't bridge. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez entered precisely on time, followed by a civilian instructor whose rumpled shirt and thick glasses suggested an academic background rather than military service. Dr. Marcus Webb had spent 30 years designing flight control systems for various aircraft manufacturers, his theoretical knowledge complementing Rodriguez's practical experience. Together, they represented the dual nature of modern aviation, the marriage of engineering principles and operational reality. "This morning we begin with aircraft systems," Dr. Webb announced, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to explaining complex concepts to audiences with varying levels of understanding. The F/A-18 Super Hornet represents the current state-of-the-art in multi-role fighter design. Every system on this aircraft has been optimized for combat effectiveness, reliability, and maintainability. The first slide appeared on the projection screen, showing a detailed schematic of the aircraft's electrical system. Maya recognized it immediately from her study of the technical manuals, but seeing it presented in this context, as part of a systematic education rather than self-directed learning, provided new perspectives on the relationships between different components. Dr. Webb's presentation covered primary and secondary electrical systems, backup power sources, and the complex logic that governed power distribution during various flight phases. Maya took notes methodically, not because she needed to learn the information, but because writing helped her organize the knowledge she already possessed and identify gaps in her understanding. The electrical system operates on a priority basis, Dr. Webb explained, pointing to specific components on the diagram. Flight-critical systems receive power first, followed by mission-essential systems, then convenience items. In the event of multiple generator failures, the system will automatically shed non-essential loads to preserve battery power for critical functions. Phoenix Williams raised his hand. What's the typical battery life if you lose all generator power? Approximately 20 minutes under normal electrical load, Rodriguez answered. Less if you're operating radar, countermeasures, or other high-draw systems. The aircraft will give you enough power to find a place to land, but not enough to loiter while you figure out what went wrong. Shark Thompson nodded with the understanding of someone who had experienced electrical emergencies in combat. I had a generator failure over Iraq in a Legacy Hornet. The battery warning light became my best friend for about 15 very long minutes. The discussion that followed revealed the depth of experience among the other candidates. They shared stories of system failures, emergency procedures, and the kind of split-second decision-making that separated competent pilots from exceptional ones. Maya listened carefully, noting not just the technical details but the mindset these pilots brought to problem-solving. They thought in terms of alternatives, backup plans, and calculated risks. Dr. Webb moved on to hydraulic systems, explaining the dual redundant design that ensured control authority even if one system failed completely. The presentation included detailed diagrams of actuators, pumps, and the complex network of lines that translated pilot inputs into control surface movements. Maya found herself mentally comparing the Super Hornet's design to other aircraft she had studied, noting the evolutionary improvements that represented decades of operational experience. Hydraulic failure in a fighter aircraft is serious but not necessarily catastrophic, Rodriguez added. The Super Hornet has sufficient redundancy to maintain control even with significant system damage. However, the flight characteristics change dramatically, and emergency procedures must be executed precisely. Zen Nakamura leaned forward in his seat. How does the backup flight control system behave during high-G maneuvering? I've heard the control response becomes very sluggish. That's correct, Dr. Webb replied. The backup system is designed for survivability, not performance. You'll maintain basic control authority but forget about aggressive tactical maneuvering. The aircraft will fly, but it won't fight effectively. Maya made a note about backup system limitations, adding it to her growing understanding of how system failures cascaded through aircraft performance. She had read about these concepts in technical manuals, but hearing them discussed by people who had experienced them firsthand provided context that no manual could convey. The morning session continued with presentations on environmental control systems, fuel management, and the integrated avionics that coordinated all aircraft functions. Each topic built upon the previous one, creating a comprehensive picture of how modern fighter aircraft operated. Maya absorbed the information systematically, cross-referencing new knowledge with what she had learned through independent study. During the break, she remained in her seat reviewing notes while the other candidates gathered in small groups. Their conversations buzzed with technical jargon, shared experiences, and the kind of professional gossip that develops in specialized communities. She heard fragments of discussion about different aircraft they had flown, memorable missions, and instructors they had encountered at other training programs. The new girl seems pretty serious, she heard Phoenix say quietly to Shark. Takes more notes than anybody else in here. Compensating for lack of experience, Shark replied. Can't blame her for trying, but there's no substitute for stick time. You either have the feel for it or you don't. Maya didn't react to their assessment, but she filed it away as another data point in her understanding of how others perceived her. Their skepticism was neither personal nor malicious. It was the natural response of experienced professionals encountering someone who didn't fit established patterns. She had dealt with similar reactions throughout her military career and had learned that the most effective response was consistent competence over time. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez called the class back to order, introducing the afternoon instructor who would cover flight controls and avionics integration. Commander Sarah Ghost Patterson had flown combat missions in 3 different theaters, her reputation built on precision flying and tactical innovation. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had proven herself in situations where failure meant death. "This afternoon we discussed the brain of the aircraft," Commander Patterson began. "Modern fighters are not simply flying machines. They are information processing systems that happen to move through 3-dimensional space. The pilot's job is not to fly the aircraft in a traditional sense, but to manage information flow and make tactical decisions based on data fusion from multiple sensors." The presentation shifted to avionics architecture, showing how radar systems, electronic warfare equipment, navigation aids, and weapons control systems shared information through digital data buses. Maya recognized the theoretical framework from her previous work with ground-based electronic systems, but seeing it applied to aviation provided new insights into system integration challenges. "The multifunction displays are your primary interface with aircraft systems," Patterson explained, pointing to photographs of cockpit layouts. "Everything you need to know about aircraft status, tactical situation, and mission parameters is presented through these screens. Learning to interpret and manage this information flow while pulling Gs and making tactical decisions is one of the most challenging aspects of modern fighter operations." A candidate from the back of the room raised his hand. Lieutenant Bones McCarthy wore the flight suit of a Navy pilot with carrier experience, his question reflecting practical concerns about operational employment. "How do you prioritize information during high-threat situations? There's got to be more data available than you can process in real time." "That's exactly right," Patterson replied. "The aircraft systems are designed to prioritize threat information automatically, but the pilot must understand how these systems work and when to override their logic. Situational awareness in a modern fighter is as much about understanding what the aircraft is telling you as it is about what you can see through the canopy." Maya found this discussion particularly relevant to her background in electronic warfare systems. She had spent years working with equipment designed to process multiple information streams simultaneously, making split-second decisions about threat prioritization and countermeasure employment. The parallels between ground-based systems and aviation applications were stronger than she had expected. The afternoon session included hands-on training with cockpit mock-ups, allowing candidates to practice switch positions and display management procedures. Maya approached the training systematically, working through each procedure step by step until her movements became automatic. She noticed that some of the other candidates relied on muscle memory from previous aircraft, occasionally reaching for switches that were positioned differently in the Super Hornet. Phoenix Williams struggled briefly with the weapons control panel, his hand moving to where the master arm switch was located in the F-16 he had previously flown. "Damn," he muttered, "going to take some time to unlearn old habits." Maya had no old habits to unlearn. Every switch position, every procedure, every system response was being learned for the first time. In some ways, this gave her an advantage. She had no preconceptions about how things should work, no muscle memory that conflicted with new procedures. But it also meant that everything required conscious thought rather than automatic response. Commander Patterson moved through the cockpit mock-ups, observing each candidate's progress and offering guidance where needed. When she reached Maya's station, she paused to watch the methodical way Maya worked through each procedure. "You're being very systematic," Patterson observed. "Good habit for learning new aircraft." "I find it helps to understand why each step is necessary," Maya replied, continuing her practice of the engine start sequence. "That's an engineer's approach. Most pilots learn the procedures first and understand the theory later." Patterson's tone was neutral, neither approving nor critical. Both methods work, but they produce different types of aviators. Maya completed the engine start checklist and moved on to the navigation system initialization. Her movements were deliberate rather than quick, accurate rather than smooth. She could see the difference between her performance and that of the experienced pilots around her, could sense the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical skill. As the day's training concluded, candidates were assigned individual study materials and practice schedules. Maya received a stack of technical publications that covered advanced systems operation, emergency procedures, and the theoretical foundations of high-performance flight. The other candidates received similar materials, but theirs focused more on Super Hornet-specific procedures rather than fundamental aviation concepts. Walking back to her quarters, Maya passed the flight line where the day's training missions were concluding. F/A-18s touched down with the controlled violence of controlled flight meeting immovable Earth, their arresting hook systems engaging cables that brought 50,000 pounds of aircraft to a controlled stop in less than 1,000 feet. She watched the precision of each landing, noting the small corrections pilots made to maintain proper approach angles and touchdown points. In her room, Maya spread the day's materials across her desk and began the process of integrating new information with what she already knew. The theoretical knowledge was becoming more practical, the abstract concepts taking on meaning through context and application. She understood now why the other candidates looked at her with skepticism. The gap between knowing about flight and actually flying was vast, filled with subtleties that no manual could adequately convey. But Maya had built her career on bridging such gaps, on transforming theoretical understanding into practical competence through careful study and systematic practice. The challenge here was greater than any she had previously faced, but the methodology remained the same. Learn the principles, understand the applications, practice until knowledge became instinct. Outside her window, the flight line grew quiet as the last aircraft was secured for the night. Tomorrow would bring more ground school, more systems training, more opportunities to demonstrate that her unconventional background could produce conventional results. She had 2 more days before her first flight, 2 more days to prepare for the moment when theory would meet reality at 400 knots and 20,000 feet. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, but Maya Chen had never backed down from a challenge simply because the odds were against her. The sky might keep its own score, but she intended to give it something worth measuring. The simulator bay at Shadowhawk existed in perpetual twilight, its windowless interior illuminated by the soft glow of instrument panels and computer screens. Maya arrived at 0500, 30 minutes before her scheduled session, finding the space empty except for the low hum of cooling systems and the occasional electronic chirp from dormant equipment. 6 full-motion simulators occupied the center of the bay, each one a precise replica of an FA-18 Super Hornet cockpit mounted on hydraulic actuators that could reproduce every sensation of flight except the ultimate consequence of failure. She had requested additional simulator time after her second day of ground school, recognizing that her lack of flight experience created a fundamental disadvantage that extra study hours alone couldn't overcome. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez had granted the request, with the kind of skeptical approval reserved for students whose dedication exceeded their apparent capabilities. The simulator would be available from 0530 to 0630 each morning, 1 hour of private practice before the scheduled training sessions began. Maya approached Simulator 3 with the methodical precision that had become her trademark. The cockpit was identical to the aircraft she had inspected on the flight line. Every switch, gauge, and display positioned exactly as it would be in the actual fighter. She settled into the ejection seat, adjusting the harness until it fit with the snug security that safety protocols demanded. Her movements were careful and deliberate, each action cross-referenced against the mental checklist she had memorized from countless hours of study. The startup sequence required 47 separate actions performed in precise order, each one critical to aircraft safety and performance. Maya worked through them systematically, her fingers finding switches and controls, with the conscious effort of someone translating theoretical knowledge into physical action. The displays flickered to life around her, presenting the complex array of information that modern fighter pilots processed continuously during flight operations. Engine start procedures in the simulator felt anticlimactically simple compared to the dramatic descriptions she had read in technical manuals. The twin F-404 engines spooled up with realistic sound effects, but without the visceral sensation of 30,000 pounds of thrust building behind her. She monitored temperatures and pressures as the power plant stabilized, noting the way different systems came online automatically as engine-driven generators began supplying electrical power. The first simulated flight was a basic familiarization profile: takeoff, climb to altitude, level flight, and landing. Maya advanced the throttles and felt the simulator pitch slightly upward as it replicated the acceleration down an imaginary runway. At 140 knots, she applied gentle back pressure to the stick, and the visual display showed the horizon dropping away as the aircraft climbed into a clear digital sky. The sensation was oddly detached, intellectually engaging but emotionally flat. She could see the instruments responding correctly, could feel the simulator moving beneath her as it reproduced the motions of flight, but something essential was missing. The experience felt like watching a movie of flying rather than actually commanding an aircraft through three-dimensional space. Maya leveled off at 10,000 feet and began practicing basic flight maneuvers. Turns, climbs, descents, and the fundamental building blocks of aircraft control came slowly at first, each input requiring conscious thought before execution. She had memorized the stick and rudder inputs required for various maneuvers, had studied the relationships between power settings and aircraft performance, but translating that knowledge into smooth control inputs proved more challenging than anticipated. A simple left turn required coordinated movement of stick, rudder, and throttle to maintain altitude and airspeed while changing heading. Maya's initial attempts were jerky and imprecise, the aircraft wandering above and below the desired altitude as she over-controlled in response to instrument indications. She could see what needed to be corrected, could analyze the errors intellectually, but her hands hadn't yet learned to make the subtle inputs that produced smooth flight. After 40 minutes of practice, she configured the simulator for landing approach, beginning the complex process of slowing a high-performance fighter to a speed where it could safely touch down on a runway. Gear extension changed the aircraft's flight characteristics significantly, adding drag and altering the relationship between power and performance. Maya worked through the landing checklist methodically, cross-checking each item against her mental database of procedures. The final approach required precise control of airspeed, altitude, and descent rate while managing the aircraft's tendency to sink rapidly when power was reduced. Maya found herself constantly adjusting throttle position, trying to maintain the narrow flight envelope that separated a successful landing from disaster. Her first attempt ended with the simulator's collision warning system activating as she flew into the ground short of the runway, the visual display going blank as the computer registered a fatal crash. She reset the simulation and tried again, this time carrying more power through the approach. The second attempt was better but still imprecise, the simulated aircraft touching down hard and bouncing twice before settling onto the runway. Maya made notes about power settings and approach angles, analyzing her mistakes with the same systematic approach she brought to every learning challenge. By 0630, when her private session ended, Maya had completed 3 successful landings out of 8 attempts. The improvement was measurable but incremental, each successful approach building on lessons learned from previous failures. She shut down the simulator systems methodically, leaving the cockpit in the same configuration she had found it. Phoenix Williams entered the simulator bay as Maya was securing her equipment, his flight suit already bearing the first traces of perspiration from the desert heat outside. He nodded to her with a casual acknowledgement of shared early morning dedication, but his expression carried curiosity about what she had been practicing in private. "Getting some extra stick time?" he asked, settling into the simulator adjacent to hers. "Trying to," Maya replied, organizing her notes into neat columns. "The landing phase seems particularly demanding." Phoenix began his own startup sequence with the fluid efficiency of someone who had performed similar procedures thousands of times. His hands moved across the control panel without conscious direction, muscle memory guiding actions that had become as automatic as breathing. "Landing a fighter is like threading a needle while riding a roller coaster," he said. "Takes time to develop the feel for it." Maya watched his preparation routine, noting the casual competence with which he managed multiple tasks simultaneously. He initialized navigation systems while monitoring engine parameters, cross-checked radio frequencies while reviewing weather information, and coordinated with simulated ground control with barely conscious effort. The gap between her methodical approach and his intuitive fluency was obvious and daunting. Shark Thompson and Zen Nakamura arrived together, their conversation continuing from wherever it had begun. They moved to their assigned simulators with the easy confidence of people completely comfortable in their environment, chatting casually while running through complex checklists that demanded Maya's complete attention. "Heard the weather's going to be perfect for actual flights next week," Shark mentioned while configuring his flight management system, light winds, unlimited visibility. "Good conditions for first flights. Assuming everyone passes the simulator phase," Zen replied. "Some of these profiles are pretty demanding for familiarization training." Maya absorbed their casual discussion while focusing on her own preparation. The scheduled group session would involve formation flying practice, a complex evolution that required precise position keeping and coordinated maneuvering. She had studied the theoretical aspects extensively, but recognized that formation flying demanded the kind of intuitive aircraft control that she was still developing. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez entered the simulator bay precisely on schedule, followed by Dr. Webb and Commander Patterson. The instructors moved between the simulators, conducting individual briefings and reviewing training objectives for the session. Rodriguez stopped at Maya's station, consulting his tablet while she completed her pre-flight checks. "Chen, you'll be flying wing position in a four-ship formation," he informed her. "Your job is to maintain position relative to the lead aircraft while executing coordinated turns and altitude changes. The key is smooth control inputs and constant visual reference to the lead aircraft." "Understood, sir." Rodriguez paused, noting the careful arrangement of her notes and the systematic way she had organized her cockpit preparation. "You've been coming in early for additional practice," he observed. "Yes, sir. I felt it would be beneficial." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Good initiative. Formation flying requires precise aircraft control, and there's no substitute for practice. His tone was neutral but not discouraging. Stay within your comfort zone initially. Formation flying looks elegant, but it's actually quite demanding from a workload perspective. The simulator session began with all 4 aircraft taking off from Shadowhawk's main runway, climbing to 15,000 feet in loose formation. Maya struggled initially to maintain visual contact with Phoenix's aircraft while managing her own flight path, the dual demands of position keeping and basic aircraft control overwhelming her processing capacity. Her position relative to the lead aircraft wandered as she focused too intently on instrument readings, then overcorrected when she looked up to find herself out of position. "Viper 4, you're drifting aft," Rodriguez's voice crackled through the simulated radio system. "Add power and close up the formation." Maya advanced her throttles and felt the simulated aircraft accelerate, but her correction was too aggressive, carrying her past proper position before she could compensate. You can say. The constant cycle of falling behind and catching up consumed mental energy that experienced pilots reserved for other tasks. She could hear the easy professionalism in the radio calls from the other aircraft, their pilots managing formation position as a background task while conducting tactical discussions and navigation updates. The formation proceeded through a series of coordinated turns, each maneuver requiring the wing aircraft to adjust power and position to maintain proper spacing. Maya found herself consistently behind in her reactions, recognizing the need for corrections after her position had already degraded. The intellectual understanding of formation flying principles didn't translate smoothly into the physical coordination required for execution. "Formation flying is about anticipation," Commander Patterson's voice offered through the instructor frequency. "You need to see what the lead aircraft is going to do before he does it. Anticipate power changes and flight path adjustments before they become obvious." Maya acknowledged the guidance while struggling to maintain visual contact during a descending turn. The lead aircraft appeared to slide across her canopy as perspective angles changed, requiring constant adjustment to maintain proper position. Her workload was completely saturated, every bit of mental capacity focused on the immediate demands of formation keeping. After an hour of practice, the formation configured for landing approach, a complex evolution that required precise spacing and coordinated configuration changes. Maya managed to maintain approximate position through the initial approach phase, but the final landing sequence overwhelmed her ability to manage multiple tasks simultaneously. Her simulated aircraft touched down significantly behind the rest of the formation, her approach poorly coordinated with the group timing. The post-flight briefing took place in an adjacent classroom, where instructors reviewed performance using recorded data from the simulator session. Maya's flight path appeared on the projection screen as a wandering line that contrasted sharply with the smooth tracks of the more experienced pilots. The visual representation of her performance was both humbling and educational, highlighting specific areas where improvement was needed. "Chen, your aircraft control is methodical and generally safe," Rodriguez observed while reviewing her data. "However, formation flying requires more aggressive control inputs and faster reaction times than you're currently demonstrating. The aircraft needs to go where you want it, when you want it there." Maya took notes on the specific recommendations, adding them to her growing collection of performance feedback. The gap between her current capability and program standards was measurable and significant, but not necessarily insurmountable. Each training session provided data about areas needing improvement and specific techniques for addressing weaknesses. Phoenix Williams approached her after the briefing, his expression showing the mixture of encouragement and realism that characterized professional aviators discussing performance issues. "The simulator stuff will come with practice," he said, "but the real aircraft responds differently. More powerful, more responsive, but also less forgiving of imprecise control inputs." "I appreciate the perspective," Maya replied, organizing her materials for departure. "One thing that might help. Try to stay ahead of the aircraft mentally. Right now you're reacting to what's happening instead of anticipating what's about to happen. In a fighter, reacting puts you behind the aircraft. And once you're behind, it's hard to catch up." Maya nodded, filing away the advice with the rest of her growing collection of practical wisdom. The theoretical knowledge that had carried her through ground school was proving insufficient for the dynamic demands of flight operations, but each session provided incremental improvement and clearer understanding of specific skills that needed development. Walking back to her quarters through the afternoon heat, Maya passed the flight line where actual aircraft were conducting training missions. The sight and sound of real F/A-18s operating in the pattern provided visceral context for the sanitized simulator experience. The aircraft moved with purposeful violence, their engines creating thunder that resonated through her chest, their presence commanding attention in ways that no simulation could replicate. In 2 days, she would transition from the controlled environment of simulators to the unforgiving reality of actual flight. The margin for error would disappear, replaced by the absolute honesty of an aircraft that responded to skill rather than good intentions. Maya understood that her methodical approach and systematic preparation had brought her this far, but the next phase would demand capabilities that could only be developed through direct experience with the machine itself. She spent the evening reviewing flight procedures and emergency checklists, preparing for the moment when theoretical knowledge would meet practical reality at altitude. The stakes were higher than any test she had previously faced. But Maya Chen had built her career on transforming preparation into performance when it mattered most. Tomorrow would provide another opportunity to narrow the gap between where she was and where she needed to be. The operations briefing room at 0430 hours carried the hushed intensity of a place where lives hung in the balance of preparation and precision. Maya sat in the front row, her flight suit crisp and properly fitted, every pocket secured according to regulation. Around her, the ambient sounds of pre-dawn military aviation filled the spaces between spoken words, the distant whine of auxiliary power units spinning up on the flight line, the muted conversations of ground crews conducting their methodical inspections, and the periodic crackle of radio transmissions coordinating the complex choreography of flight operations. Today marked her transition from simulation to reality, from the controlled environment of computer-generated scenarios to the unforgiving honesty of an actual F/A-18 Super Hornet. The briefing materials spread across her small table represented weeks of preparation distilled into practical application. Weather data showing perfect flying conditions, airspace assignments that would keep training aircraft separated from operational traffic, and emergency procedures that she had memorized but never hoped to use. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez entered the briefing room with the measured urgency that characterized all activities at Shadowhawk. His flight suit bore the accumulated patches and modifications of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of controlled violence in three-dimensional space, each marking telling a story of missions flown and challenges overcome. Behind him came the other instructors who would observe today's flights from both air and ground perspectives, their collective experience representing thousands of hours of combat and training operations. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we transition from academic exercise to operational reality," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood that the margin between success and catastrophe in high-performance aviation was measured in milliseconds and inches. "The aircraft you will fly today are identical to those currently deployed in combat theaters around the world. They are maintained to the same standards, carry the same capabilities, and demand the same level of precision from their pilots." Maya absorbed the briefing with the concentrated attention she brought to all critical information, but part of her consciousness remained focused on the physical sensations of anticipation that seemed to concentrate in her chest and stomach. She had studied extensively about the physiological effects of stress and anticipation on pilot performance, had read about the ways experienced aviators managed pre-flight anxiety, but intellectual understanding provided limited comfort when facing the unknown variables of actual flight. The weather briefing revealed conditions that textbooks would describe as ideal: clear skies with visibility unlimited, winds light and variable, temperature and density altitude within normal parameters. Maya recognized that such conditions represented a gift for someone making their first flight in a high-performance aircraft, eliminating the additional complexity that weather could introduce to an already challenging situation. Chen, you're scheduled for a basic familiarization flight with Commander Patterson as safety observer, Rodriguez announced, consulting his assignment roster. Profile includes taxi, takeoff, basic airwork at altitude, and return for landing. Duration approximately 1 hour, depending on your comfort level and performance. Maya nodded acknowledgement while making notes about fuel requirements in emergency airfield locations. The flight would be conducted within a restricted training area where she could focus on aircraft handling without concerns about civilian traffic or complex airspace requirements. Commander Patterson would fly a separate aircraft, maintaining visual contact while observing her performance and providing guidance through radio communication. The personal equipment issue process required careful attention to details that could determine survival in emergency situations. Maya was fitted with a G-suit designed to prevent blood pooling during high-acceleration maneuvers, its inflatable bladders creating pressure around her legs and abdomen that would automatically adjust based on aircraft maneuvering. The survival vest contained emergency signaling devices, water purification tablets, and other equipment designed to sustain life if she were forced to eject over hostile territory. The helmet fitting required precise adjustment of communication systems, oxygen connections, and the heads-up display that would project critical flight information directly onto her visor. Maya tested each system methodically, verifying radio clarity, oxygen flow rates, and the proper alignment of display symbology. The equipment felt heavier and more cumbersome than she had expected, adding physical constraints to the mental demands of flight operations. Phoenix Williams was suiting up for his own flight at the adjacent equipment station, his movements showing the practiced efficiency of someone completely comfortable with the ritual of preparation. He noticed Maya's careful attention to equipment details and offered unsolicited advice with the casual generosity that characterized professional aviators sharing knowledge. "The G-suit takes some getting used to," he mentioned while adjusting his own equipment. "Feels weird at first, like wearing a blood pressure cuff around your entire lower body. But you'll be grateful for it the first time you pull some serious Gs." "How much G-force should I expect during basic maneuvering?" Maya asked, genuinely curious about the physical demand she would soon experience. "Probably not more than 3 or 4 gigaseconds during your first flight," Phoenix replied. "That's enough to get your attention, but not enough to cause problems if you're in decent physical condition. The aircraft is capable of pulling 9 gigaseconds, but they'll work you up to that gradually." Maya filed away this information while continuing her equipment checks. She had maintained excellent physical conditioning throughout her military career, had trained specifically for the cardiovascular demands of high-performance flight, but intellectual preparation and actual experience were different categories of knowledge entirely. The walk to the flight line carried symbolic weight that Maya recognized but tried not to overanalyze. Each step brought her closer to the moment when years of study and preparation would be tested against the reality of commanding a machine capable of speeds and accelerations that compressed human reaction time into fractions of seconds. The desert air remained cool in the pre-dawn darkness, but she could sense the heat that would build as the sun climbed higher into the clear Nevada sky. A-18 tail number 207 sat in its assigned parking spot like a crouched predator, its angular lines and swept wings creating an impression of barely contained violence even while stationary. Ground crews had completed their pre-flight inspections, removing safety pins and connecting ground power equipment that would support engine start procedures. Maya approached her assigned aircraft with the mixture of reverence and professional focus that she had observed in experienced pilots, recognizing that the machine demanded respect while remaining ultimately subordinate to human skill and judgment. The external inspection process took on new significance when applied to an aircraft she would actually fly rather than simply study. Maya examined each component with heightened attention, looking for discrepancies that could affect flight safety or aircraft performance. The tires showed normal wear patterns, the control surfaces moved smoothly through their full range of motion, and the engine intakes were clear of debris that could damage the expensive turbine components. Commander Patterson completed her own pre-flight inspection at a nearby aircraft, her movements showing the unconscious competence that came from thousands of repetitions of the same critical procedures. She approached Maya as the final preparations were completed, her expression serious but not unfriendly. "First flight in a fighter is always memorable," Patterson said, her tone carrying the authority of someone who had guided many students through this same transition. "The aircraft will feel different from anything you've experienced in simulators. More powerful, more responsive, but also more honest about your control inputs." "I understand the performance differences intellectually," Maya replied. "I expect the physical sensations will be quite different from simulation." Exactly right. The simulator can reproduce the visual and auditory aspects of flight, but it can't replicate the G-forces, the acceleration, or the visceral sense of actually moving through three-dimensional space at high speed. Patterson paused, studying Maya's expression. "Trust your training, but also trust your instincts. The aircraft will tell you what it wants to do. Your job is to listen and respond appropriately." Maya climbed the crew ladder to the cockpit with deliberate care, each movement conscious and controlled. The ejection seat felt different from the simulator version, more substantial, with the kind of mechanical precision that reminded her that this was equipment designed to save her life under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. She settled into the seat and began the process of connecting herself to the aircraft through oxygen hoses, communication leads, and the various systems that would monitor her physiological condition during flight. The cockpit startup sequence required the same 47 actions she had practiced countless times in simulation, but executing them in the actual aircraft carried additional weight and significance. Each switch activation initiated real systems. Each display that came online represented actual aircraft status rather than computer simulation. Maya worked through the checklist methodically, cross-checking each action against her mental database of procedures while monitoring the aircraft's response to her inputs. Engine start procedures felt dramatically different in the actual aircraft. The twin F-404 engines spooled up with a deep rumble that she felt through the ejection seat and aircraft structure, their 30,000 pounds of combined thrust creating vibrations that no simulator could adequately reproduce. Maya monitored engine parameters as they stabilized, noting the way temperatures and pressures climbed to normal operating ranges while the aircraft systems came online automatically. Ground control cleared her for taxi with the routine professionalism that characterized all communications at Shadowhawk, but Maya heard additional significance in the words that authorized her to begin moving toward the active runway. She released the parking brake and advanced the throttles slightly, feeling the aircraft begin to roll forward with surprising eagerness for such a massive machine. Taxiing the FA-18 required constant attention to steering inputs and brake pressure, the aircraft's tendency to weathervane and crosswinds demanding continuous small corrections to maintain proper ground track. Maya found herself working harder than expected to keep the fighter moving smoothly along the taxiway, the nose-wheel steering more sensitive than she had anticipated based on simulator experience. Commander Patterson's aircraft taxied alongside at a discreet distance, her position allowing observation of Maya's ground handling technique while maintaining appropriate separation. The radio crackled with routine communications between aircraft and ground control, creating an audio backdrop of professional efficiency that helped normalize what was actually an extraordinary personal milestone. The run-up area adjacent to the active runway provided space for final system checks before takeoff, a last opportunity to verify that all aircraft systems were functioning normally before committing to flight. Maya positioned her aircraft in the designated area and began working through the extensive pre-takeoff checklist, each item verified against actual instrument readings rather than memorized normal indications. Flight control checks required moving the stick and rudder pedals through their full range of motion while observing the corresponding movement of external control surfaces. Maya could see the ailerons, elevator, and rudder responding correctly to her inputs, the mechanical linkages translating her commands into the control surface deflections that would soon guide the aircraft through three-dimensional space. Engine run-up procedures involved advancing the throttles to military power, while monitoring all engine parameters for normal operation. The sound and vibration levels increased dramatically as the engine spooled up to full power, creating a sensory environment unlike anything Maya had experienced in simulation or ground training. She could feel the aircraft straining against the wheel brakes, eager to accelerate down the runway and transform from ground vehicle into flying machine. All systems showed normal indications, all checklists were complete, and the weather remained perfect for flying. Maya contacted the tower for takeoff clearance, her voice steady despite the adrenaline that was beginning to build as the moment of actual flight approached. The tower controller cleared her for takeoff with the same routine professionalism used for every aircraft. But Maya heard the words as authorization to attempt something that weeks of preparation had been building toward. She taxied onto the active runway and aligned the aircraft with the center line, checking that the heading indicator matched the runway heading and that all engine instruments showed normal readings. Commander Patterson's aircraft was visible in her peripheral vision, positioned for takeoff from a parallel runway that would allow her to maintain visual contact throughout the flight. Maya advanced the throttles to military power and released the wheel brakes, feeling the FA-18 surge forward with an acceleration that pressed her back into the ejection seat with surprising force. The runway centerline streaked past the nose as airspeed built rapidly, the aircraft eager to transition from its unnatural ground-bound state to the three-dimensional freedom of flight. At 140 knots, she applied gentle back pressure to the control stick and felt the main landing gear lift off the runway as the Super Hornet climbed into the crystal-clear Nevada sky. The transition from ground to air happened with startling quickness, the aircraft seeming to leap off the runway once sufficient lift was generated by the wings. Maya Chen was flying. The first sensation that registered in Maya's consciousness was the complete absence of the vibrations and mechanical noise that had characterized every moment of ground operations. The FA-18 settled into flight with an almost supernatural smoothness, the turbulence and bumps of taxi operations replaced by the fluid grace of an aircraft operating in its natural element. Through the heads-up display, she could see her airspeed stabilizing at 250 knots, while the altimeter wound upward past 1,000 feet. But the numbers seemed disconnected from any physical sensation of speed or climb. "Shadowhawk Tower, Viper 7 airborne," she transmitted, her voice carrying more confidence than she felt as the ground fell away beneath her wings. "Viper 7, contact departure control on 327.4, good flight," the tower controller replied, with the routine efficiency that characterized thousands of similar exchanges each month. Maya switched radio frequencies while simultaneously retracting the landing gear, the mechanical thump of the gear doors closing providing tactile confirmation that the aircraft was transitioning to its flight configuration. Commander Patterson's F/A-18 appeared in her peripheral vision, flying a loose formation position that allowed observation while maintaining safe separation. The sight of another aircraft sharing the same piece of sky created an odd sense of companionship in what had suddenly become a very large and empty-feeling universe. The climb to 15,000 feet provided Maya's first experience with the pure power that separated fighter aircraft from every other form of transportation. She advanced the throttles smoothly and felt the aircraft respond with an eagerness that seemed almost eager to please, the twin engines providing thrust that made altitude gain feel effortless rather than the laborious process she had expected based on her experience with smaller aircraft in simulation. The Nevada landscape spread out below like a detailed map, the geometric precision of human development giving way to the organic chaos of desert terrain as they climbed higher. "Viper 7, level off at 15,000 and begin your orientation maneuvers when ready," Commander Patterson's voice crackled through the radio, her tone professionally neutral but carrying undertones of evaluation that Maya recognized from years of military training. Leveling off at altitude required Maya to reduce power and adjust the aircraft's pitch attitude to maintain constant altitude, while airspeed stabilized at the desired cruise setting. The process involved more finesse than she had anticipated, the aircraft's eagerness to climb or descend in response to small power changes demanding continuous attention to the relationship between throttle position, pitch attitude, and performance. She found herself making constant small adjustments, chasing the desired flight parameters with control inputs that felt either too aggressive or too subtle. The first prescribed maneuver was a series of gentle turns designed to familiarize her with the aircraft's response to control inputs at cruise flight conditions. Maya initiated a left turn with what felt like appropriate stick pressure, but the F/A-18 rolled into the turn with surprising authority, requiring immediate opposite stick to prevent overbanking. The aircraft wanted to turn more aggressively than her inputs intended, its control response more immediate and powerful than any simulation had prepared her for. "Easy on the stick inputs," Commander Patterson advised over the radio. "The aircraft is much more responsive than the simulator. Think of it as flying with fingertips rather than your whole hand." Maya acknowledged the guidance while working to complete a 180-degree turn that maintained constant altitude and airspeed. The maneuver required coordination of stick, rudder, and throttle that challenged her ability to process multiple variables simultaneously. In simulation, she had focused primarily on stick inputs while treating power management as a secondary consideration, but the actual aircraft demanded attention to the complex relationships between all control inputs and their combined effect on flight path. Completing the turn series took longer than the prescribed time limits. Maya's cautious approach to control inputs producing turns that were accurate but inefficient. She could sense Commander Patterson's evaluation of her performance through the radio silence that followed each maneuver, the absence of corrective guidance suggesting competent but unimpressive execution. The next phase involved practicing climbs and descents while maintaining constant airspeed, a seemingly simple task that proved surprisingly demanding when executed in an aircraft capable of climbing at 30,000 feet per minute. Maya initiated a climb by raising the nose slightly and adding power, but the FA-18's response was so immediate and dramatic that her airspeed began bleeding off rapidly, forcing her to lower the nose and reduce power to prevent approaching stall conditions. "Power first, then attitude," Patterson's voice offered through the radio. "In a fighter, power controls altitude, and attitude controls airspeed." Opposite of what you might expect from civilian training, but that's how these machines work best. Maya processed this guidance while attempting another climb, this time adding power first and allowing the aircraft to accelerate before raising the nose to establish the desired climb attitude. The technique felt counterintuitive based on her theoretical understanding of flight principles, but the aircraft responded more predictably to this sequence of inputs. The climb stabilized at the desired airspeed, with less hunting and fewer corrective inputs required. 20 minutes into the flight, Maya began to develop a tentative understanding of the aircraft's personality, the way it preferred to be flown rather than simply controlled. The FA-18 seemed to reward smooth, deliberate inputs while punishing hesitation or indecision, with flight path deviations that required increasingly aggressive corrections. Unlike the forgiving nature of training aircraft described in various manuals, the Super Hornet demanded precision and confidence from its pilot. "Let's try some steeper turns," Commander Patterson transmitted. "Roll into a 60-degree bank to the left to maintain altitude and airspeed." Maya initiated the turn with more aggressive stick input than she had used for the gentle maneuvering, feeling the aircraft roll rapidly into a steep bank angle that compressed the horizon into a narrow band visible through the top of her canopy. The sensation was unlike anything she had experienced in simulation, a visceral awareness of the aircraft's orientation in space that seemed to engage balance systems she hadn't known she possessed. Maintaining altitude in the steep turn required significant back pressure on the stick, and a corresponding increase in power as the wing's reduced lifting efficiency demanded higher angle of attack and more thrust. Maya found herself pressing back into the ejection seat as G-forces built, the weight of her helmet and equipment multiplying as the aircraft pulled through the turn. Her vision remained clear, but she could feel the physical effort required to maintain normal head position against the centrifugal forces. "Good turn," Patterson's voice carried a note of approval. "Your altitude control is improving. Try one to the right, same bank angle." The right turn felt different from the left, subtle variations in control response and G-force distribution that Maya couldn't immediately explain but definitely noticed. She completed the maneuver with better altitude control, the lessons from the previous turn translating into improved performance despite the short time interval between attempts. After 30 minutes of basic maneuvering, Commander Patterson cleared Maya to practice approach and landing configuration, the phase of flight that would determine whether her first flight ended successfully or became a learning experience of a different kind. Configuring the aircraft for landing involved extending the landing gear, lowering the flaps, and adjusting engine power to maintain proper approach speed while descending toward the runway. "Viper 7, contact Shadowhawk Tower on 238.1 for landing approach," Patterson instructed. "I'll be following you through the pattern." Maya switched radio frequencies and contacted the tower controller, requesting permission to enter the traffic pattern for landing approach. The controller cleared her to enter downwind for runway 32, the same runway she had departed from what seemed like hours earlier, but had actually been less than 45 minutes. The prospect of landing the fighter created a different category of anxiety than she had experienced during the airwork phase. Making mistakes at altitude was embarrassing, but landing mistakes could be catastrophic. The traffic pattern at Shadowhawk was designed for high-performance aircraft, with longer legs and wider spacing than civilian airports to accommodate the higher speeds and different energy management requirements of military fighters. Maya flew the downwind leg at 300 knots, monitoring her position relative to the runway, while preparing for the configuration changes that would transform the sleek fighter into a machine capable of landing safely. "Gear down, flaps down, hook up," she announced over the radio, following the standard configuration call that informed all aircraft in the pattern of her intentions. The landing gear extension created noticeable drag and a subtle change in the aircraft's flight characteristics, requiring power adjustments to maintain desired airspeed and altitude. Turning from downwind to base leg required precise timing and energy management, the goal being to arrive at the final approach course with appropriate altitude, airspeed, and configuration for a stabilized approach to landing. Maya initiated the turn while monitoring multiple parameters simultaneously: altitude decreasing toward pattern altitude, airspeed maintained at approach speed, power setting adjusted for the new configuration. The base leg provided her final opportunity to make major corrections before committing to the final approach course. Maya could see the runway ahead, its geometric precision contrasting with the organic irregularity of the surrounding desert terrain. The visual references were different from simulation, the real-world depth perception and environmental cues providing richer information but also more potential for distraction and misinterpretation. Viper 7 turned final when ready, cleared to land runway 32, winds light and variable. The tower controller transmitted with the routine professionalism that characterized thousands of similar clearances. Maya rolled into the final turn, aligning the aircraft with the runway centerline, while managing the complex energy equation that would determine landing success. Too much speed or altitude would require aggressive corrections that could destabilize the approach, while insufficient energy could lead to dangerous flight conditions close to the ground where recovery options were limited. The final approach in an FA-18 felt nothing like the gentle descent profiles she had practiced in simulation. The aircraft seemed eager to land, requiring constant power adjustments to maintain proper approach speed as aerodynamic drag increased with configuration changes. Maya found herself adding and reducing power continuously, chasing the desired flight path with control inputs that felt either inadequate or excessive. "Looking good, maintain your approach speed," Commander Patterson's voice provided encouragement through the radio, her aircraft visible in Maya's peripheral vision as she followed through the same approach pattern. The runway appeared to grow larger with surprising speed as Maya descended through 500 feet above ground level, visual references changing rapidly as perspective angles shifted during the final approach phase. She could see individual runway markings, the precise geometry of approach lighting systems, and the heat shimmer rising from concrete that had been absorbing desert sunlight for several hours. At 200 feet above the runway, Maya encountered her first significant challenge, a subtle crosswind that hadn't been apparent at altitude but became noticeable as she descended into the ground effect boundary layer. The aircraft wanted to drift left of the runway centerline, requiring rudder inputs and slight banking corrections to maintain proper alignment. The final 50 feet of approach required intense concentration as visual references changed rapidly, and the margin for error compressed into inches and fractions of seconds. Maya could see the runway rushing toward her, could feel the aircraft settling toward the concrete with what seemed like excessive speed despite her instruments showing normal approach parameters. The main landing gear touched the runway with a firm thump that resonated through the aircraft structure, followed immediately by the nose gear settling onto the concrete as Maya reduced power and applied wheel brakes. The FA-18 decelerated rapidly, its advanced braking systems and aerodynamic drag bringing 50,000 pounds of aircraft to taxi speed within reasonable distance. Viper 7, nice landing, contact ground control on 121.9, the tower controller transmitted, his routine tone carrying no indication that he had just witnessed someone's first fighter aircraft landing. Maya taxied clear of the active runway with hands that were trembling slightly from adrenaline and concentration, the physical symptoms of stress becoming apparent now that the immediate demands of flight had concluded. She had successfully completed her first flight in an FA-18 Super Hornet, had taken off, maneuvered at altitude, and landed without incident or embarrassment. But as she taxied toward the parking area, Maya understood that competent execution of basic procedures was merely the entry fee for the challenges that lay ahead. The aircraft had revealed its personality during this first encounter, had shown her glimpses of the performance envelope that separated fighters from every other category of aircraft. What she had accomplished today was significant, but it was also just the beginning of a learning process that would demand increasingly sophisticated skills and knowledge. Commander Patterson's aircraft taxied alongside as they approached the parking area, her formation position a subtle reminder that Maya's performance had been observed and evaluated by someone whose standards were derived from combat experience and operational requirements. The post-flight briefing would provide detailed analysis of her performance, identifying strengths to build upon and weaknesses that required attention. Maya shut down the engines and began the post-flight procedures that would secure the aircraft for maintenance inspection. Her movements still careful and deliberate, but now informed by actual experience rather than theoretical knowledge alone. She had crossed the threshold from ground-bound student to someone who had commanded a fighter aircraft through its natural element, and the transformation felt both significant and incomplete. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beyond the flight line, its vastness a reminder of the sky that had temporarily accepted her presence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more complex maneuvers, and higher standards of performance. But today, Maya Chen had proven that careful preparation and systematic approach could translate into actual flight capability, even in an aircraft designed for pilots with years of experience. The first flight was complete. The real training was about to begin. The post-flight briefing room felt smaller and more intimate than the large classroom where Maya had attended academic sessions, its walls covered with performance charts and photographs of aerial maneuvers that she was only beginning to understand from practical experience. Commander Patterson sat across from her at a metal table, a tablet displaying flight data that had been automatically recorded during every moment of their airborne operations. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows that emphasized the serious nature of performance evaluation, where objective measurements would determine whether Maya's first flight represented acceptable progress or concerning deficiencies. Your takeoff and initial climb were textbook correct, Patterson began, consulting the recorded data while making notes on a standardized evaluation form. Airspeed control was precise, climb rate appropriate, and radio procedures followed standard protocols. No issues with basic aircraft handling during the departure phase. Maya absorbed the feedback while reviewing her own mental notes from the flight, comparing her subjective impressions with the instructor's objective analysis. The takeoff had felt smooth and controlled from her perspective, but she recognized that her limited experience provided no basis for judging whether her performance met the standards expected from students at this level of training. Patterson scrolled through additional data screens, highlighting specific portions of the flight where Maya's performance had deviated from optimal parameters. During the maneuvering phase, you demonstrated good situational awareness and appropriate caution with control inputs. However, your response times were consistently slower than we expect to see at this stage of training. The criticism was delivered without malice but with the kind of professional directness that characterized all feedback at Shadowhawk. Maya understood that instructor evaluations were based on objective standards rather than personal opinions, that her performance was being measured against requirements derived from combat experience and operational necessity rather than academic theory. Your altitude control during turns improved significantly as the flight progressed, Patterson continued, which indicates good learning ability and adaptation to aircraft characteristics. The steep turns showed particular improvement between the first and second attempts. Maya made notes about specific techniques that had produced better results, analyzing the relationship between control inputs and aircraft response with the systematic approach she brought to all learning challenges. The feedback provided valuable data about areas where her simulator training had adequately prepared her and others where actual flight experience revealed gaps in understanding. The landing approach was your strongest performance area, Patterson said, her tone carrying a note of genuine approval. Airspeed control was excellent, configuration management followed proper procedures, and your response to the crosswind during final approach showed good instincts for aircraft handling. This assessment surprised Maya, who had felt least confident during the landing phase when visual references and control inputs seemed to compress into an overwhelming stream of information requiring immediate processing. Her subjective experience of struggling with multiple simultaneous demands apparently had not translated into observable performance deficiencies. Overall assessment is satisfactory for a first flight, Patterson concluded, signing the evaluation form with the kind of precise signature that suggested thousands of similar documents. You demonstrated safe aircraft handling, appropriate respect for the machine's capabilities, and the kind of methodical approach that generally leads to steady improvement over time. Maya accepted the evaluation with mixed feelings. Satisfaction at having met minimum standards balanced against recognition that satisfactory performance in basic procedures represented only the first step in a much longer and more challenging process. The other students in her class were demonstrating proficiency levels that reflected years of aviation experience, while she was still learning fundamental relationships between control inputs and aircraft response. After the official briefing concluded, Maya walked to the flight line where maintenance crews were conducting post-flight inspections on the aircraft she had flown. Watching the systematic process of checking every component and system provided insight into the complex support structure that kept high-performance fighters operational. Each aircraft required hours of maintenance attention for every flight hour logged, a reminder that the machines were technological marvels that demanded constant care and expertise. Technical Sergeant Maya Santos, the crew chief responsible for Maya's assigned aircraft, approached with a clipboard containing maintenance forms that required pilot signature. Her weathered hands and stained coveralls spoke of years spent ensuring that million-dollar fighters remained ready for operations, her expertise representing knowledge that complemented pilot training but operated in a different domain entirely. "How'd she fly for you today?" Santos asked, her tone carrying the proprietary interest that experienced maintainers felt toward their assigned aircraft. "Very well," Maya replied. "Responsive control, stable flight characteristics, no unusual indications or behaviors." Santos nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose work had been validated by successful operations. "She's a good bird." "Engines are running smooth, all systems checking normal. You'll be flying her again tomorrow?" "That's the current schedule." "We'll have her ready." "Same pre-flight routine, but maybe you won't need to spend quite so much time on the external inspection once you get more familiar with what's normal and what isn't." Maya appreciated the gentle suggestion, recognizing that her methodical approach to pre-flight procedures, while thorough and correct, had taken longer than experienced pilots typically required. Learning to distinguish between necessary caution and excessive hesitation would be another skill to develop as her experience base expanded. The remainder of the afternoon was scheduled for academic study and flight planning for the next day's training mission, which would involve more complex maneuvering and the introduction of basic tactical concepts. Maya returned to her quarters with a stack of technical publications covering advanced flight procedures, emergency situations, and the theoretical foundations of air-to-air combat maneuvering. Her room had become a study center organized with military precision, reference materials arranged by topic and frequency of use, notes categorized according to aircraft systems and flight procedures. The walls displayed charts showing performance envelopes, emergency checklists, and the kinds of quick reference materials that experienced pilots internalized through years of repetition. Maya opened her flight log and made the first entry documenting actual flight time in an FA-18 Super Hornet, 1 hour and 12 minutes of dual instruction that represented a milestone in her transition from ground-based military specialist to aspiring fighter pilot. The numbers seemed modest compared to the thousands of hours logged by experienced aviators, but they represented genuine progress toward a goal that had seemed impossibly distant just weeks earlier. The technical manual for advanced maneuvering procedures contained detailed explanations of combat-oriented flight techniques that went far beyond the basic air work she had practiced during her first flight. Energy management principles, high-G maneuvering techniques, and the complex relationships between airspeed, altitude, and tactical advantage would require mastery before she could advance to the next phase of training. Reading about 6G barrel rolls and defensive spiral techniques while sitting in the quiet safety of her room felt oddly disconnected from the visceral reality of actually commanding an aircraft through such maneuvers. Maya could understand the theoretical principles, could memorize the control inputs and techniques, but she recognized that intellectual knowledge would provide limited preparation for the physical and mental demands of high-performance maneuvering. A knock on her door interrupted her study routine. Phoenix Williams stood in the hallway, his flight suit bearing the accumulated dust and sweat stains that marked the conclusion of his own training missions. His expression carried the mixture of professional interest and personal curiosity that characterized interactions between students who were simultaneously colleagues and competitors. "Heard you had a good first flight," he said, settling into the room's single chair without waiting for invitation. "Patterson doesn't give out satisfactory ratings easily, especially for first flights." "I managed to avoid embarrassing myself," Maya replied, closing the technical manual but keeping her place with a finger. "The aircraft is significantly different from simulation, but the basic procedures translated reasonably well." Phoenix nodded with the understanding of someone who had made similar transitions between different aircraft types. "The Super Hornet is forgiving compared to some fighters, but it's also honest about pilot technique. If you're behind the aircraft mentally, it'll let you know pretty quickly." I noticed that during the maneuvering phase, the response time between control input and aircraft reaction is much faster than I expected. That's the difference between a fighter and everything else, Phoenix explained. These machines are designed to change flight path rapidly and dramatically. Great when you need to avoid a missile or engage a target, but it means there's no margin for sloppy stick work. Maya appreciated the perspective from someone who had experience with multiple aircraft types, whose evaluation of her progress was based on practical knowledge rather than instructor protocols. Phoenix's comments suggested that her methodical approach and careful attention to procedures were producing results that other students recognized as competent, if not exceptional. Tomorrow's mission profile looks interesting, Phoenix continued, consulting his own notes. Formation work, basic aerial combat maneuvering, introduction to high-G flight. Big step up from today's basic air work. Maya had reviewed the same mission profile, recognizing that tomorrow's flight would represent a significant increase in complexity and physical demands. Formation flying required precise aircraft control while maintaining visual contact with other aircraft. Aerial combat maneuvering involved aggressive flight techniques that pushed both pilot and machine toward performance limits, and high-G flight would introduce physiological stresses that could affect decision-making and motor control. Any advice for managing the increased workload? Maya asked, genuinely interested in insights that could improve her performance. Trust your preparation, but also trust your instincts, Phoenix replied. You've got good knowledge of aircraft systems and procedures, but tomorrow you'll need to start thinking tactically while managing the physical demands of fighter maneuvering. The key is staying ahead of the aircraft mentally, anticipating what you need to do rather than reacting to what's happening. After Phoenix departed, Maya returned to her study materials with renewed focus on the technical aspects of tomorrow's training. Formation flying procedures required understanding of relative motion principles, energy management during coordinated maneuvering, and the communication protocols that allowed multiple aircraft to operate safely in close proximity. The manual contained detailed diagrams showing proper positioning relative to lead aircraft, but Maya recognized that translating these static images into dynamic flight situations would require skills that could only be developed through practice. The sections covering aerial combat maneuvering introduced concepts that seemed to exist at the intersection of physics, psychology, and artistry. Successful execution of defensive maneuvers required understanding of energy states, turn rate capabilities, and the three-dimensional geometry of aerial combat. But beyond technical knowledge, effective maneuvering demanded the kind of spatial awareness and tactical thinking that distinguished competent pilots from exceptional ones. Maya made detailed notes about power settings, G-force limitations, and the physiological techniques that helped pilots maintain consciousness and effectiveness during high-acceleration maneuvering. The technical information was precise and comprehensive, but she understood that tomorrow's flight would provide her first real test of whether academic knowledge could translate into practical performance under stress. Late that evening, Maya walked to the flight line where her assigned aircraft sat under the maintenance hangar's bright lights. Technical Sergeant Santos and her crew were conducting routine inspections, their systematic attention to detail ensuring that tomorrow's training mission would begin with an aircraft in perfect mechanical condition. The sight of dedicated professionals working through the night to support flight operations reminded Maya that her individual performance was part of a much larger team effort. "Evening check looks good," Santos called out, recognizing Maya despite the dim lighting. "She'll be ready for whatever you need to do tomorrow." "I appreciate the attention to detail," Maya replied. "Tomorrow's mission profile is significantly more demanding than today's basic air work. These birds are built for demanding missions. Just remember that the aircraft will do whatever you ask of it, but it expects you to ask clearly and decisively. Hesitation and indecision are what get pilots into trouble." Maya walked back to her quarters carrying that advice, recognizing its relevance not just to aircraft handling, but to the broader challenges of succeeding in an environment where standards were derived from combat requirements rather than academic theory. Tomorrow would test whether her systematic preparation and methodical approach could adapt to the increased complexity and higher performance demands of advanced flight training. She spent the final hour before sleep reviewing emergency procedures and rehearsing the communication protocols that would coordinate tomorrow's formation flying exercise. The mental rehearsal process had become second nature during her military career, a technique for improving performance by practicing complex procedures in a safe environment where mistakes carried no consequences. Maya Chen had successfully completed her first flight in an FA-18 Super Hornet, had proven that careful preparation could translate into acceptable performance even in unfamiliar and demanding circumstances. Tomorrow would determine whether that initial success represented genuine capability or merely beginner's luck, whether her unconventional background could produce the kind of tactical thinking and aggressive maneuvering that characterized professional fighter pilots. The desert wind rattled her window as she prepared for sleep, carrying the distant sounds of night operations and the constant background hum of a military installation that never truly rested. Somewhere in that darkness, other students were preparing for their own challenges. Other instructors were evaluating progress and planning training scenarios. Other maintainers were ensuring that million-dollar fighters remained ready for operations. Maya had earned her place in that community through one successful flight, but tomorrow would determine whether she could advance to the next level of challenge and complexity. The stakes continued to rise with each training phase, but her confidence was growing along with her experience. The sky had accepted her presence once. Tomorrow she would ask for more. The emergency klaxon shattered the pre-dawn silence at Shadowhawk, with the kind of urgent electronic screaming that transformed sleeping aviators into combat-ready pilots within seconds. Maya bolted upright in her bunk, muscle memory from years of military service driving her feet to the floor before her conscious mind had fully processed the alarm's meaning. The digital clock beside her bed showed 0347 hours, well before any scheduled training operations, which meant this was either a drill or something far more serious. Red emergency lighting flickered on throughout the base as Maya pulled on her flight suit with practiced efficiency, her movements automatic despite the adrenaline surge that accompanied unexpected alerts. Through her window, she could see ground crews running toward the flight line, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they prepared aircraft for what appeared to be an unscheduled launch. The organized chaos of emergency response was already building momentum across Shadowhawk's sprawling complex. The base-wide communication system crackled to life with Commander Harrison's voice, his tone carrying the clipped authority of someone dealing with a genuine crisis rather than routine training. All available pilots report to Hangar 7 immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, all available pilots to Hangar 7 for emergency briefing. Maya grabbed her helmet and survival gear, joining the stream of personnel moving rapidly through the corridors toward the main briefing area. Around her, experienced pilots and instructors moved with the fluid efficiency of professionals responding to circumstances they had trained for, but hoped never to encounter. The conversations were brief and focused, fragments of information suggesting that something significant was developing beyond the controlled environment of normal training operations. Hangar 7 buzzed with controlled urgency as pilots filled the available seating while maintenance crews prepared aircraft in the background. Commander Harrison stood at the front of the room beside a large display screen showing a map of the southwestern United States, red symbols indicating what appeared to be aircraft positions and flight paths. His expression carried the kind of grim focus that Maya recognized from combat deployments. The look of someone making decisions with incomplete information and significant consequences. At 0315 hours, we lost contact with a civilian airliner en route from Los Angeles to Denver, Harrison began, his words cutting through the ambient noise like a blade. United Flight 847, a Boeing 777 with 312 souls on board, experienced catastrophic electrical failure approximately 200 miles northeast of Las Vegas. The aircraft is flying dark, no transponder, no radio contact, no navigation lights. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. A commercial airliner with hundreds of passengers was operating without communication or navigation systems somewhere in the desert night, effectively invisible to air traffic control systems that depended on electronic cooperation between aircraft and ground facilities. Maya felt her stomach tighten as she recognized the potential for catastrophe inherent in such a situation. Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly, Harrison continued, indicating areas on the map where storm systems were building. We have maybe 90 minutes of flyable weather before visibility drops to zero and winds exceed safe limits for search operations. After that, any rescue or recovery efforts become exponentially more difficult. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez stepped forward, his tablet displaying aircraft assignments and crew pairings. We're launching every available aircraft in pairs to conduct visual search patterns across the most likely flight path. The airliner is probably trying to reach McCarran International in Las Vegas, but without navigation aids, they could be anywhere within a 50-mile radius of their last known position. Maya remained seated as instructor pilots and senior students received their assignments, understanding that as the most junior pilot in the program, she would likely remain on the ground while more experienced aviators handled the emergency response. Her single training flight, while successful, hardly qualified her for a search and rescue mission in deteriorating weather conditions with human lives at stake. The assignment process continued methodically, each pair of pilots receiving specific search sectors and communication frequencies. Maya watched as Phoenix Williams was paired with Shark Thompson, their combined experience making them an obvious choice for the challenging mission ahead. Zen Nakamura drew assignment with one of the instructor pilots, his carrier experience valuable for operations in marginal weather conditions. "Chen," Rodriguez called out, consulting his tablet with a slight frown. "You're paired with Commander Patterson, Search Sector 7. Maya blinked in surprise, certain she had misheard the assignment. Around her, other pilots turned to stare with expressions ranging from confusion to concern. Her single training flight hardly qualified her for emergency search operations, especially in weather conditions that would challenge even experienced aviators. "Sir," she said, standing slowly, "I've only logged one flight in the Super Hornet. Perhaps someone with more experience would be more appropriate for this mission." Commander Harrison looked up from his mission planning materials, his expression revealing nothing about his decision-making process. "Chen, according to your service record, you spent 3 years operating advanced radar and electronic warfare systems in contested environments. Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir, but ground-based systems are." "The missing airliner is electronically dark," Harrison interrupted. "Standard search techniques rely on transponder signals and radio communication, neither of which are available in this situation. We need someone who understands how to locate aircraft using passive detection methods and electronic signature analysis." Maya began to understand why she had been selected, despite her limited flight experience. Her background in electronic warfare and signal intelligence provided capabilities that were directly relevant to finding an aircraft that had become invisible to conventional detection methods. The technical skills she had developed during ground deployments could be applied to airborne search operations in ways that pure flight experience could not replicate. "Commander Patterson will handle aircraft operation while you manage the electronic search systems," Harrison explained. "Your job is to find that aircraft using whatever means necessary, not to demonstrate pilot proficiency." 20 minutes later, Maya found herself strapping into the rear seat of a 2-play/A-18F Super Hornet configured with advanced electronic warfare pods and sensors. Commander Patterson occupied the front cockpit, her hands moving efficiently through pre-flight procedures, while Maya familiarized herself with the electronic systems that would be her primary responsibility during the mission. The aircraft's radar and electronic support systems were more sophisticated than anything Maya had operated from ground installations, their capabilities enhanced by the mobility and elevation advantages of airborne platforms. She spent the taxi and takeoff phases configuring the sensors for passive detection mode, searching for the electronic signatures that even a dark aircraft would inevitably produce. "What are we looking for?" Patterson asked over the intercom as they climbed toward their assigned search altitude. "Any aircraft generates electromagnetic emissions," Maya replied, her attention focused on the displays showing electronic activity across multiple frequency bands. "Engine ignition systems, flight instruments, even basic electrical systems create signatures that can be detected if you know what to look for and have sensitive enough equipment." The search pattern took them across the stark Nevada landscape at 20,000 feet, high enough to maximize radar coverage while remaining below the weather that was building rapidly from the west. Maya manipulated the electronic warfare systems with growing confidence, her understanding of signal processing and electronic detection principles translating effectively to the airborne environment. For 40 minutes, they flew systematic search patterns without detecting any trace of the missing airliner. Maya monitored multiple sensors simultaneously, analyzing electronic noise for patterns that might indicate aircraft systems operating in emergency mode. The technical challenge was complex, distinguishing potential aircraft signatures from the electronic noise generated by ground-based installations, other aircraft, and natural phenomena. "Storm's moving in faster than forecast," Patterson observed, noting the wall of dark clouds approaching from the west. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before we have to head home." Maya intensified her concentration on the electronic displays, recognizing that time constraints were forcing a choice between systematic search procedures and intuitive analysis based on incomplete data. Her years of experience in electronic warfare had taught her to recognize patterns that existed at the edge of detection capability, signals that were more suggestion than certainty. "I'm getting something," she announced, pointing to a faint electronic signature appearing intermittently on her displays. "Bearing 045, approximately 30 miles. Very weak, but the frequency pattern looks consistent with commercial aircraft electrical systems operating in degraded mode." Patterson banked the FA-18 toward the indicated bearing, pushing the throttles forward to close the distance rapidly. Maya continued monitoring the electronic signature as it grew stronger, her confidence increasing that they had located the missing airliner. The signal characteristics matched the profile of an aircraft with severe electrical damage but sufficient power generation to maintain minimal flight instruments. "There," Patterson called out, pointing through the canopy toward a distant speck barely visible against the dark terrain. 2 o'clock low, about 10 miles. Maya looked up from her displays to see the Boeing 777 flying slowly and unsteadily at low altitude, its navigation lights dark and its flight path erratic. The airliner appeared to be searching for a place to land, probably running low on fuel after hours of flight without proper navigation systems. "Shadowhawk Control, Viper 7, Patterson transmitted on the emergency frequency. We have visual contact with United 847, approximately 15 miles northeast of Henderson Executive Airport. Aircraft appears to be in controlled flight, but probably lost and running low on fuel." The response came immediately from the control tower, relief evident in the controller's voice. "Viper 7, outstanding work. We're vectoring rescue helicopters to your position and coordinating with Henderson Tower for emergency landing procedures." Maya watched as Patterson maneuvered their FA-18 into position alongside the much larger airliner, close enough for the commercial pilots to see their military escort but far enough away to avoid any risk of collision. The sight of the fighter aircraft seemed to provide immediate reassurance to the airline crew, who began following Patterson's lead toward the nearest suitable airport. "United 847, this is Navy fighter alongside your position," Patterson transmitted on the international emergency frequency. "We're going to lead you to Henderson Executive Airport, about 12 miles ahead. Follow our heading and maintain current altitude." The airliner's pilot responded with brief clicks of his radio transmitter, indicating that he could hear their transmission but could not respond verbally due to electrical system damage. Maya continued monitoring the Boeing's electronic signature, noting improvements in system stability as the crew managed their emergency procedures with the guidance of their military escort. The approach to Henderson Executive Airport required careful coordination between Patterson's fighter, the struggling airliner, and ground controllers who were clearing all other traffic from the area. Maya watched the delicate dance of emergency procedures unfold, recognizing that her role in locating the missing aircraft had been critical, but that the successful conclusion depended on skills and experience she was only beginning to develop. United Flight 847 touched down safely at Henderson Executive at 0523 hours, its 312 passengers and crew evacuated without injuries despite hours of flight in a severely damaged aircraft. Emergency vehicles surrounded the Boeing 777 as its crew shut down engines and secured systems, their professionalism under extreme stress matching the standards Maya was learning to expect from aviation professionals. The flight back to Shadowhawk felt different from any training mission Maya had experienced. She had contributed meaningfully to a real-world operation with genuine stakes, had used her specialized knowledge to help save lives in circumstances where conventional approaches had proven inadequate. The technical skills she had developed during years of ground-based service had translated directly into aviation applications, proving that her unconventional background could provide unique value in the right circumstances. Commander Harrison was waiting on the flight line when they landed, his expression showing the kind of satisfaction that came from successful mission completion under difficult conditions. The post-mission briefing would analyze every aspect of the search and rescue operation, identifying lessons learned and areas for improvement, but Maya already understood that something fundamental had changed in how others perceived her capabilities. "Outstanding work, both of you," Harrison said as they completed shutdown procedures. "Chen, your electronic warfare skills made the difference between finding that aircraft and losing 312 people in the desert. That kind of specialized capability is exactly why this program exists." Maya nodded acknowledgement while recognizing that tonight's success represented both validation and challenge. She had proven that her unique background could contribute to mission success in ways that conventional pilot training alone could not provide. But she had also raised expectations for future performance in an environment where standards were constantly escalating. That should be. As dawn broke over the Nevada desert, Maya Chen walked across the flight line toward her quarters, her flight suit bearing the subtle stains and creases that marked the conclusion of genuine operations rather than training exercises. Around her, Shadowhawk was returning to its normal rhythm of instruction and evaluation, but something had changed in the way other personnel looked at her as she passed. She was no longer the inexperienced outsider struggling to meet minimum standards. She had become someone whose unusual combination of skills could make the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The quiet woman who had arrived with no flight experience had proven that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources, that the sky belonged to anyone with the skill and determination to claim it. But Maya understood that tonight's success was just the beginning. The real test would be whether she could build on this foundation, whether her systematic approach to learning could transform tonight's emergency response capabilities into the broader skills required for advanced fighter operations. The standards would continue to rise, the challenges would become more complex, and the margin for error would remain unforgiving. What happened next would determine whether Maya Chen became a footnote in aviation history or something much more significant. But tonight, she had proven that careful preparation, specialized knowledge, and quiet determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The sky had not only accepted her presence, it had needed her. The future remained unwritten, but it was filled with possibilities that hadn't existed when she first stepped onto the tarmac at Shadowhawk. And somewhere in the growing light of desert dawn, those possibilities were taking shape. If this story of quiet determination and unexpected heroism resonated with you, take a moment to consider the overlooked talents around you. Sometimes the greatest strengths come from the most unexpected places, and the people who seem least likely to succeed may be exactly what the situation demands. What did you think of Maya's journey from dismissed outsider to mission-critical team member? Have you ever witnessed someone prove their worth in ways that surprised everyone? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might inspire someone who feels like they don't belong. And if you enjoyed this story of perseverance and hidden potential, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of people who refused to accept limitations and found ways to turn their unique backgrounds into extraordinary achievements. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story about ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things. Remember, you never know who might be quietly preparing to change everything. Sometimes the most dangerous opponents and the most valuable allies are the ones nobody sees coming.